All right, I think it's happening. I think this is actually working. I think this is actually going on. And look at that. It says it'll work. I think it's actually working. I think it's actually, yeah. There we go. Let's turn me off. Um, hey, this is Noe from Walk with Yah, doing the from the first to the third heavens Bible study. Glad you are here, whether you're here real time, whether you're watching later, heck, maybe even your spirit is here watching while you're physically somewhere else. We'll talk about that. Okay, let's see. Just so that you know where you're at, let me get this up going on right quick. Here we go. You are from the first to the third heavens videocast, a Bible study presented by Walk with Yah. All right, take that away for just a second. So, um, glad you're here. If you didn't know, Walk with Yah, doing this Bible study, during this first year, I'm going over what's called a Parsha study, which is basically doing the Torah and covering it in a year with a lot of um, aligning with other books and what's called the Haftarah, which is like the major, the minor prophets, that type of stuff. And then also looking at the apostolic writings, what people refer to as the New Testament. Not a big fan of that word. And in many cases, many times, it's we're going to look at themes and see how they are go all throughout the Bible. And uh, after we finish Parsha, we'll move on to something else and see what else, however the Holy Spirit leads. But I thought it would be good to start there. And so there's been a lot going on. If you read the description prior to leading up to this day, to this event, to this video cast, wasn't sure if I was going to do it or not, as I've been battling what appears to be a kidney stone. Um, and so, but been a lot of ups and downs with that, as I believe it was even a spiritual attack also as well. Maybe, maybe not. Still looking at that. Um, but I like to, again, not everything spiritual, but many things are that we don't think that they are. They're actually more spiritual more often than what we think. We just tend to think of, we just tend not to think that way a lot of times. But because of the work I do, I look at things differently, which is part of why we have this Bible study. Because we tend to forget that we are more spiritual beings than we are flesh and blood, and so I think that when we read the Bible, we tend to forget that we as humans, uh, we look at the physicality of everything, at the world from a historical perspective as well, from science and what the news tries to feed us, and what churches try to feed us and congregations, whatever. And there's a lot more to the Bible than that, which is why I'm here. So let's get started with that. Let me kind of just get into the back into the cockpit here and see if okay. So let's go back to sharing. Anyways, that was my intro, just so you know. Um, all right. Move some things around a little bit here. Put you over there. Oh, I forgot to hit record. Let's do that. Okay. Now we've officially started. Now that I've officially remembered to hit the official record button. Um, Glad you're here. Okay. Okay. Let's go over the agenda for the day. So, what we're going to be covering is, oh, I forgot to change the date. Really? I'm going to have to go back and fix that. Of all those, uh, yeah, I'll update the PDF after this video is done. Um, so you'll see that, uh, that over just a little bit, that we'll be going over Korah, which means baldness, ice, hail, frost, or in a sense, barrenness. So from number 16, going to Hukat, I probably mispronounced that, which means statute, decree, ordinance, which goes to Numbers 22. So we'll be covering all that today. There is a lot going on, as you would expect in the Bible. We're covering a lot of time in these Bible verses, and it's going to be no different today. That Again, a lot to cover. So, um, let's get started. In Numbers 16, we have Korah's rebellion. And one resource I was looking at said this is actually four rebellions, because first you got Korah. So he started the first rebellion, and then he raised 250 up against Moses, which was the second rebellion, and then against Aaron, the third rebellion. And at that point in time, in number 16, you know, we see Moses and he falls on his face here. And then we see that Dathan and Abiram, uh, they basically they twist the narrative. I mean, just take everything out of context, which much like we see today with a lot of people that are rebelling and stuff like that, they're just going based on emotions. And if you've ever done spiritual warfare, working with demons and stuff like that, you probably know that uh, sometimes when people don't know what they're fighting and they don't realize that they have a demon in them, or sometimes they may know and they want that demon for whatever reason. And there are, I can get into that, but I'll save that for later. That demons are not logical. And so, sometimes I've been amazed at sometimes how demons can twist people's logic. And I'm like, how in the world did you get this person to believe that lie? And they are able to do it some kind of way. So, and that was the case here, that we see that, um, you know, they're saying, is it little that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey? It's like, hold on now, what? Like, don't you remember, you know, that you were slaves getting whipped and all this type of stuff, and they're like, hey, you wanted to kill us in the wilderness when it was Yah, God, that is fighting them, leading them away from, all the other, Canaanite nations, everyone else wanted to kill them. And, so that you would also seize rule over us, which uh, was never the case. But again, the enemy has a way of twisting logic. And so in John 8:43, we see the Bible where it says, this is Yeshua talking, why do you not know what I say? Because you're unable to hear my word. You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you wish to do. He was a murderer from the beginning. He has not stood in truth because there's no truth in him. When he speaks the lie, he speaks of his own, for he's a liar and the father of it. And because I speak the truth, you do not believe me. And there's a lot of people these days that, I don't know, they seem to run from the truth. They let their emotions and they kind of They don't double check things, and that's how the enemy takes over. I was actually reading this someone's take on AI, um, and I thought it was interesting. I made a good point, and he's like, "Hey, it's not going to be like, hey, one day, you believe this way, and the next day AI, takes over." It's like, no, it's going to happen by degrees as we slowly empower AI more, giving it more power to make changes to our accounts and stuff like that, and then eventually we will become slave to it. And so, kind of the same thing. And so, anyways, I'll leave that there, but just give you an idea what's kind of going on. Um, and so, you know, someone asked me the other day, Noe, do you believe that AI could be, the beast? Yeah, it's a possibility. And so, do I believe that there's demons in AI as well as potential other entities? Yes, very well possible. Anyways, so we see Yah, he judges with supernatural judgment in a way we've never seen before. So, again, because, Moses falls on his face and he's like, in prayer, like, hey, like, Father, I'm, lifting these people up to you. And yes. So, so we see them again in number 622. They fall on their faces and they're like, even God's getting mad at this point in time. He's like, look, separate yourself from the midst of the congregation. Let me consume them. But it was Moses and Aaron is like, hey, you know, let's reason with God, which is our job sometimes. Sometimes, is that the test? Maybe it is. And so we're supposed to be ministers of reconciliation. And so, anyways, what ends up happening is that the earth actually opens up. It's something that has never happened before. And as Moshe even says this, he says in number 1630, but if Yahweh creates what is unheard of, and if he does this, you'll have to know that this is him. This is not me doing it. Um, again, here, Moshe says, by this you'll know that Yahweh has sent me to do all these works. Like if he does this unheard of thing, which he did, the ground actually opened up and swallowed um, Korah and the 250 men who were offering incense, all this type of stuff. Um, oops, sorry, hold on. There we go. And so, because Moshe was like, hey, we're just all going to have a come to Yeshua meeting. That was before they had Yeshua at the time, and you're going to bring your incense holders, and we're all going to come together, and Yah is going to choose who his spokesperson is, and he didn't choose Korah. And so again, they got swallowed up by the earth, and Yah was like, take the incense holders that they had, the gold, and beat it into plates and put it over the ark, to be as a sign or a reminder to the people, like, hey, like you probably don't want to do this again. And so there's a lot of stuff going on, but the fourth rebellion, the very next day. I'm like, really? And the people again rebel. And at that point in time, Aaron and Moses, they were seeing that Father Yah was getting really mad. And he started to send a plague. And Moses and Aaron stood between life and death to make atonement for the people, stopping the curse. And around 14,700 people died, which did not include the 250 in the original, in the first time that happened. So roughly around 15,000 people. And so And I know a lot of times we tend to look back and we're like, you silly Jewish people, how could you have done that? But really, are we any different? You think about the sins that uh, in the Garden of Eden, of the snake uh, against, Adam and Eve and stuff. And we really were not that much different. The Satan uses the same attacks over and over again. And because we're generally people, we fall for it over and over again. And so you think we'd learn. And so even I think James sums it up and says, hey, it's the lust of the eyes, the pride of life and the lust of flesh that causes us to do these things over and over again. The human condition, yes. Um, so in number 17, after all that drama, which is a lot of drama, um, Aaron's staff buds, because again, they're put to the test. They have the leaders of the tribe bring uh, uh, rods, plants to, staffs, I guess, maybe, to all come to the front, leaders of all the 12 tribes. And Moshe's like, Yahweh had Moshe do this. And it was like, I'm going to show you who I'm going to choose. And so at that point in time, he does. In number 17:10, we see that it was Aaron's rod that was uh, be kept as a sign against the rebels, to keep their end to and grumblings, an end to the grumblings, lest they die, because these people, even us, grumbled a lot. And so the questions I have here are, what does it mean to fear Yah? What does it mean to fear God? Because this gets taken out of context a lot. If you look up the word, it also means to have a reverence and awe, because if when he does, miraculous signs, wonders, miracles, there is a sense of awe. And you have to understand that if you go against him, that is a power that is way bigger, stronger than you, and it'd probably be to your benefit to believe him, but not necessarily just out of fear. There should be a reverent fear, because when I see these things, I'm like, oh my, like how great you are to, for your mercy and judgment. The fact that he just doesn't, necessarily wipe us out, but a lot of times it's for our benefit that he does these things. A lot of times in our favor, or at least that's the way I normally see it. Uh, I try to stay on his good side, of course. And so it's a balance. It's two sides of the same coin. Sure, you know, um, even with parents who are raising your kids, you want your children as much as you love them. You want them to respect you, to be reverent towards you. And obviously, that breakdown of the family has caused that not to happen these days. But ideally, that's the way it should work. And obviously, that should be done in love, of course. But love isn't always as nice and cuddly and warm and fuzzy as sometimes we want it to be. You know, sometimes love will call you a whitewashed tomb or a brood of vipers. And so, anyways, um, so to fear Yah means just that we should be reverent towards Him. And I believe that many of the problems we have today is because there isn't a reverent fear of Yah, of God, that people do not believe in Him. And I think there's reasons for that, mainly because the fault of the church and congregations. But a lot of people today don't believe in the Bible. They're looking for other, New Age or other religions or whatever, because we have gotten away, the church and congregations, from what Yah actually intended. Are there a lot of good churches that are nice and this, that, and the other? Sure. Are they doing good works? Yes, they are. And I'm thankful for them. I still think there's things that they're missing. I could go on, I'll leave that alone. And sometimes even the nicey nice stuff doesn't always cut it. They're not always, battling against demons. They're not necessarily doing the Torah. They're not necessarily, or they're putting their own versions of what they believe the Bible says. My thoughts. So, because we as Yah's God's people, another typo there, um, haven't acted as kings and priests, um, I think that that has happened. And so, because I don't know if you've heard, I've heard, a lot of people that are like, pronounce, hey, we are kings and priests. I mean, hey, that's great. Um, Again, he's made us sovereigns, kings and priests to his Elohim and Father. Um, we see this in Revelation 1. And yes, that's what we're called to be. But to say that, to declare it, and to be it is something totally different. We can say a lot of things, but they may not necessarily have any type of authority or just, you know, it could just be saying things and not uh, honoring him uh, in actual uh, actions, obedience, lifestyles. And so, because I'll ask, do we know what kings and priests do? Well, kings enact judgments, they make rulings. And so, but in order to make the rulings, you have to know the Bible, you have to know the Torah. Priests, they again have that ministry of reconciliation. They do all the religious, spiritual things that are required that were back then. A little different now. Still, a lot of things can still needs to be done to help bring people closer to Yah, to God. And so it's a one thing to say it, which is easy to say, not necessarily easy to do. And so, how should we, the congregations and churches, respond? If it helps, I typically tend to think Messianic people tend to think of their body of believers as congregations, and Protestant believers and others uh, tend to think of their non-Torah believing, uh, mostly tend to see their groups as churches. So for me, I make a distinction. That's how I see it. I could be wrong, but that's just how I see it. And so, how shall we respond? And you may have heard me say before that, I'm getting more into the courts of heaven. And so, again, I that's part of my job as a priest. I don't make my own rulings, judgments. I go to the courts of heaven, trying to see, checking the records, that type of stuff, repenting, forgiving, releasing, and trying to see if we can get the righteous judge of all creation to give a verdict and to have that carried out, and then to declare what basically he declares. Um, so again, don't go off on my own tangents, as that is dangerous. And so, anyways, but in Acts 5:9, we see here that we have Sapphira. Let's go there for a second. Acts 5. Yeah, Ananias and Sapphira. Um, and so they basically both they lied to the apostles, to the church, and they're like, hey, when we sell this land, we're going to give you all the money. And they didn't do that. They didn't have to say that, but they wanted to, appear like they were somebody, I guess. And, they were super spiritual. And Peter called them out on it. And it's like, how did you agree to test the Spirit of the Lord like this? Why did you lie when you didn't have to? And he's addressing Sapphira at this point in time. And it's like, hey, you see your dead husband over there? Guess what? That's going to happen to you. And at that point in time, this great fear comes over the whole church, who heard these things. And, because again, the apostles are doing many signs and wonders. And these people that did not want to be part of this, they were just like, we ain't joining y'all. You know, maybe because they wanted to keep on their own lusts, maybe they didn't have a proper understanding. Um, but the people held them in a high esteem. They regarded them highly. These people don't play around. Like, but we see here in verse 14 that a lot were being added to the church at that time. So is it necessarily a bad thing? You know, uh, that the enemy should be fearful of us if the church actually, being you, and those who are watching and others, actually stand up and live as the Bible actually says. Um, that's what we're supposed to be doing. And so, because it says elsewhere in the Bible that Yah will confirm his word, we don't make the miracles happen. You know, when we speak his word, when we try to live the way that he wants us to, miracles should be a natural outflow of our life. And I can talk to you, in the past week in this sickness that I've been dealing with, comes and goes. It's been a little bit of a spiritual battle, but uh, yeah, leave that alone for now. Maybe I'll share that testimony later. Numbers 18. So um, we get into the duties of the Levites and the priests. And again, that's after Aaron is shown, Yah shows, hey, Aaron's the high priest. He's the man. And so in Numbers 18, they start going over again. Hey, like, here's all the offerings and stuff like that. We need to, I'm sure it's covered in Leviticus, but we're going to go over it again. And so God says to Aaron, you and your sons and your father's house, you know, you need to bear this iniquity, this burden, because as priests, we are called to bear each other's burdens. You can't take a responsibility away from them. You can't do things for them, but you can help them bear some of that burden by teaching them, by showing them, by being a mentor to them, by, you know, whatever it is. It can be done a lot of different ways. And Yah says, and you shall keep guard over the sanctuary and over the altar, that there may never again be wrath on the people of Israel. And so, um, let me look for something. And so, but we look at that, at least I look at that, and I'm like, I still see a lot of chaos out in the world. So, like, what's up with that? And I believe because, again, we are not living a lot of religion and stuff like that we have today is not necessarily, it leaves a lot of things out, changes things. Um, and I believe that's part of the reasons that we're, in the situation we're in. I actually did a live stream, which is what I'm looking for right now. Um, and it was called, I can't find what it was called. I think it was like apocalyptimism around that time. Let me look, hold on. Yeah, Walk with Y'all live number 73. And so I was kind of at that point in time, but there is another one. Sorry, hold on. Why I'm a Torah observant Christian. Um, yeah, but Walk with Yah L73 called apocalyptimism. Basically, I gave my reasons of why I believe um, that we aren't keeping the Torah, which is kind of one reason why uh, God has to judge even America. There's many reasons, but I believe that's part of the reasons, and I kind of give my response to that. Like, what do we need to do then? Anyways, so, but again, this is what that also speaks to that concept, that idea. Um, Moving on. Numbers 18:7. And you and your sons will guard the priesthood for all that concerns the altar that is within the veil. And I'll give your priesthood as a gift, and any outsider who comes near shall be put to death. So, like, I give another teaching on that, on the different levels of the uh, of the tent in the wilderness. Um, I did 3 live streams on that. L52, L53, L54, talking about the supernatural temple of transformation, looking at the temple from a supernatural aspect, and what are the 3 different levels? What does all that mean? Anyways, so because there's a lot of spiritual meaning to a lot of that stuff. But in Luke 23:44, we see here where it states, and now was about the 6th hour, and there was the darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And this is when Yeshua was being crucified. And while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. And then Yeshua called out in a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. There is so much going on in this slide. I know it's hitting a lot of different topics, but there is a lot going on here. So, again, I was talking about the apocalyptic optimism, the supernatural transformation, supernatural temple. Um, let's look at this. Was Yeshua crucified on a Friday per tradition? And because a lot of people will be like, well, hold on, there's 3 days, and if a day is a morning and a night, and how do did he arise on a Monday, or did he get crucified on a Thursday? But if you Luke to me kind of explains it because there is darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, and so a day, if you look at Genesis 1:5, is hey, there is evening, there is morning. Again, sun kind of goes down, sun kind of comes up. Doesn't necessarily say it's 24 hours. And so there was actually 2 days in that Saturday. So to me, I was like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. Um, Other verses here that talk about, what is the veil? We obviously know that there was a veil between, uh, the inner part of the temple in the wilderness. You had the area, the set apart place, where all the menorah and the showbread and all that stuff was, and you had the incense. And then past another veil, there was the most set apart of the set apart, the most holy of holies. And so you had another veil there. And so when Yeshua died, that veil got torn, meaning we now have access to the Father, which means we can now go into places like the courts of heaven, or even go into heaven itself. If you can go there, if you have the faith to do that. And so, again, there's a lot of verses that say, hey, the veil is also a spiritual construct. Many verses on that. And again, I just explained what implication does the veil being torn have. Again, we have access to the Father now, um, which is a very big deal. And so here, uh, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. That is a very important statement. Um, in doing deliverance, sanctification ministry, I work with a lot of people that have already passed, um, whether it's what some might call a lingering human spirit, a foreign human spirit, a free roaming spirit, a disembodied human spirit, whatever it is you want to call it. When you, on this side of the veil, we have physicality, earth, first heaven, that stuff. On the other side of the veil, you have um, all kinds of different spiritual entities, not just demons. There can be people that have passed also as well. And so when Yeshua told his spirit, I commit my spirit to you, that basically means that um, he was kind of directing his spirit to go to the Father. Because sometimes when people die, their spirit may actually not know where to go and kind of just hang around the earth. And run into this many times, even with my brother-in-law many years ago when he passed in the hospital. It was just me and one of his daughters. And I told him, I was like, you can't stay here. Like, you need to go to be with Yeshua. Like, go to the real true light. And, I was like, don't worry about the family. We'll take care of them, etc. And I heard him, even though he was laying in the hospital bed, unconscious. I heard his voice and he was like, thank you. And so it's very important upon that time for you to tell your spirit and or your people, your loved ones, if they're passing away, to tell their spirit, even if they're unconscious, it's okay for you to go. You don't need to hang around. We have Yeshua, the Godhead, taking care of us. You can go. It's not, you're not the Savior, not on your shoulders. Be free. So just a little word of wisdom there for you. Okay, Numbers 18. So all the, again, talking about the duties of the priest and stuff, and all the holy contributions that the people present, um, you know, the priests were supposed to get the best of what the people offered. That's ideally how it's supposed to work. In reality, that's not how it works. Today, a lot of people think priests and ministers should just, work from the fat of the land or I don't know what. But a lot of times don't want to give. And sometimes they want the ministers to have faith, but don't have faith in themselves to actually give into the ministry. And so, funny how that works. But anyways, it talks here about a covenant of salt. And if you've ever seen people where they take the bread, sometimes they'll dip it in salt because there's a lot that the Bible has to say about a salt covenant. If you ever get time, you might want to watch a video on that. There's a lot of people that have a lot to say about it. I found it fascinating. And so, anyways, there's something if you want to check it out. In the Haftarah, we get to 1 Samuel 11. And let's jump out there for a second. All right. Saul defeats the Amorites. And so here it talks about this guy, Nahash, the Ammonite, and he goes up and um, to this Jewish city and is like, we're going to start attacking. And the people at that time said, make a treaty with us and we'll serve you. And Nahash was like, the Ammonite was like, oh, yes, I will do it, but I will gouge out your right eyes and bring disgrace upon you. I'm not going to say too much here, except if you look at the word Nahash, it actually means snake. I gave the Strong's reference there if you want to check that out. Um, uh, yes. And then just on a further note, not really in this passage, actually, let's take a look at that. So if we look at dictionaries, I don't know, put that here for a second. And H5176. Come on, you can do it. H5176. Nakash. No, let's look at this one instead. All right. All right. Thought I gave more meaning than that. Anyways, generally not a good thing. Generally, not always. Um, we'll get into that momentarily. And so let's look at the other word that I was telling you about, Hamas. We hear a lot about them in the news and stuff like that. And they're about doing wrong, violence, to treat violently, to do wrongly, ethical, physical, and so which is no surprise that we see a lot of chaos with them in the Middle East. Um, okay, we shall move to Numbers 18. So Samuel was giving this farewell address because he's like, "Hey, I'm about to die. I'm about to give you my sons." And his sons weren't really all that godly people, which goes to tell you that sometimes just because the father's good or or even evil doesn't necessarily mean that their sons will follow in their footsteps. And so Samuel says, "Look," he's talking to all of Israel. "I've obeyed your voice that you said you want a king over you." And so and he says, "Look, it was as God is witness, and he's the one that appointed Moses and Aaron to bring you out of Egypt, but yet you still want this king." And if we go back a little bit further, uh, Samuel's having this conversation with Yah, and Yah's like, "Look, give them what they want, Samuel. They're not disobeying you, they're disobeying me." And so he's like, you know, and according to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so also they are doing to you. And a lot of times people may claim to serve Yeshua, but sometimes words can be cheap. That might be part of my testimony, still debating on that. Anyways, question. Even though we profess Yeshua, Jesus, do we invite him into every area of our being and lives? Because we still have to give him permission into various areas of our being and lives. When we, get baptized and, we say those words and stuff like that, that's very initial. That's very good. Um, but say, for example, this is actually a true example. With one of my clients, they had gotten a camper and we were doing work and found out that there was a lot of evil that was done in that camper and we had to cleanse it out. Even though some people prayed over it and did some stuff before, that didn't take care of it. I'm glad they did it, but we went in deeper and found out that you know uh, there was actually some angels that came and helped, and so um, when we were finished, I asked the father, I was like, should these people dedicate this camper to you? And he goes, they don't have to. It would be good if they did. And they were already believers. And so I believe that we should often say, look, I invite you, the Godhead, into my heart, my mind, my relationships, my businesses, my ministry, my family. You know, if you get a new place, all over my car, like we're just stewards. And so a lot of times, even though we've dedicated ourselves to him or profess Yeshua, it's still good to invite him to make that statement again. Um, and so in 1 Samuel 12, verse 17, um, again, Samuel's talking to the people who wanted their king, and he's like, look, um, you're going to have a king, and this is how it's going to go down. And you need to fear Yah and fear God. And what I'm going to do is, you know, he says, is today not the wheat harvest? Which kind of gives you the, that's a time code there. But anyways, at that point in time, I don't believe it rained a lot. The latter rains didn't come until like, not that it didn't rain at all, but I don't think, but didn't come until, September-ish. Um, Anyways, he was like, let me call the Yah so he sends thunder and rain. And then you'll know and see that your evil is great, which you have done in the eyes of Yahweh, in asking for yourself a sovereign. And Samuel calls out to Yah, and Yah answers. And so Samuel called upon God, and God sends the thunder in the day, that day. And all the people greatly feared Yah, God, and Samuel. So much like we talked in the book of Acts, isn't necessarily a bad thing for when God shows his power, his strength, that people should have a reverent fear. They're like, oh God, like we have sinned and we need to get right. I'm a firm believer that, look, however people get to Yah, whatever it takes, do that. Some people are like, well, no, that's a fear tactic. And that's how some people operate. That's what some people need. Now, am I saying is that the first option? I don't think this is the first option that Samuel tried or that God has tried either. He tried to be very loving with that. But if that doesn't work, sometimes they might need something else, another way. So, um, Numbers 18. And so all the people said to, Samuel, hey, pray for us. Um, you know, and Samuel then starts trying to talk sense to them now that he's kind of got their attention. Says, don't be afraid. Don't, you've done all this evil, but serve Yah God with all your heart. Do not turn aside from him. Yah will not forsake his people, for his great name's sake, not necessarily for you, but for his own sake. And so, he's like, look, I'll instruct you in the good and right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him faithfully. And so, but if you still do wickedly, you will be swept away. So that fear, again, there's two sides of the same coin. Is fear always bad? One of the questions I have here. No, not necessarily. Sometimes it calls us to be more attentive. If we know that there's a snake right over there, if we're not fearful, you might get bit. So what is the purpose of fearing Yah? It's to us to have a respect of him, to draw us towards him, ideally, um, to know that there are repercussions for not doing the right thing. Do sometimes people sometimes think of the God as of the Old Testament as being mean and evil wrongly. Yes, hear that a lot. They're just like he's a big old meanie, and he just wanted to kill people, etc. Um, Hebrews 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, and so, but when they tend to say, hey, Yeshua was a lot nicer. And so, like, he got a lot softer after he had his only begotten son. And so, but we see here in Hebrews 2 and 3 that Yeshua was the exact representation of the Father. And so, and as we talked before, a lot of the things, the, what we think a lot of times of God visiting his people in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, was actually Yeshua himself. And so, but I think Father Yah gets a bad rap a lot of times just because from a lot of bad teaching. Apostolic writings, Jude 1 through verse 25. judgment on false teachers. Um, and so here in Jude 10, it talks about, um, again, Korah's rebellion. And it says here that, these people, all they do is just blaspheme. You know, these people blaspheme all that they do not understand. Again, we talked about this earlier. This happens a lot today. They don't understand things. They're going based on emotions, misunderstandings, deceit, lies. They don't check it against the Bible. And they're destroyed by all that they, like unreasoning animals, understand instinctively. Woe to them. So much like, Korah's rebellion, who didn't understand, didn't check in with God, just kind of went off his own, pride, whatever. Um, that leads to a question. But before I go there, so these are hidden reefs at your love feast, that they feast with you without fear. Again, a lot of people claiming to be Christians that in word only, but I pray that they are. Hopefully, they're not just honoring with lips and not with their heart. And so, but let's talk about this people. He's saying here that the people, they're kind of like unreasoning animals. They've kind of gone back to the very basic instincts type of mentality. And if we look at Genesis 2:7, and there's a lot more that can be said here, but just this is a very important verse because it says that the Lord formed the man out of the dust, the man of dust from the ground, which again speaks to our flesh, our body, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. A breath meaning ruach. That's the word for spirit, breath, wind. And the man became a living creature soul, a nephesh haya. Nephesh meaning, again, a soul, haya meaning life. And when you have the ruach and the nephesh, you become what's known as the neshama, which is, so these are different levels of spirit consciousness being. And so I gave some links here. You can look some more there about what this guy has to say, Sam Neller. A little hard to navigate the website there. He kind of goes into the detail there and kind of explains it, takes his time with it. Don't know if I haven't followed his other teachings, but on this one here, I thought it was pretty good. Now, so again, what are the different levels of the soul spirit consciousness? Well, the lowest one being nefesh, which and ruach, which again, animals have these things. They don't have a neshama, and so, and per the Chabad, which is a Hebrew Orthodox sect, they believe there's other levels, five complete. Maybe not. Got to be careful with Chabad. They kind of get into Kabbalah stuff that goes to some places I don't think they should be going. All, again, they mix it with a lot of things that could be right, but a lot of, it's very gray, dangerous territory. Um, anyways, so um, so that verse right there made me wonder: Can can their spirits get degraded? And doing ministry work, I know that people can um, their spirits can get hijacked or can either get taken and replaced or possessed with demons, and the human spirit and portions themselves may not know. And you may ask again, can our spirit or souls get degraded? And if you look at Daniel 4:24 verses 37, the story of Nebuchadnezzar, he's king, and then he gets called out by Daniel by a dream. Daniel explains it. He starts eating grass for around 7 years like an animal. So just something to think about. So in Jude, there's a call to persevere in Jude 1:18, where it says, "In the last time there will be scoffers following their own ungodly passions." Let's go there. um, that these who cause divisions, worldly people, devoid of the Spirit, but you, beloved, building yourselves up, pray your most holy faith, and praying in the Holy Spirit. Well, that's interesting. Well, why is that interesting, though? Um, Give me a moment while I just take this and highlight it for a second. Because there seems to be a distinction here made. And I haven't had the time. This has been a thought that's been on my mind for a while. I just haven't had time to study this out. Um, I believe that in the Bible, uh, again, I still need to study this out, search it out. It's just a concept at this point in time. Because if you see here, it says the Spirit, but the Spirit here is capitalized. But here it says the set apart Spirit. So there's a distinction made. And so I'm wondering if this actually means human spirits. Um, a lot more to be said there, but um, I think a lot of times in the Bible where it says spirit and it doesn't make necessarily a distinction of, say, the set apart spirit, it may not actually mean what we think it means. So, okay. Going to the second Parsha, Torah, Numbers 19. We're going to jump there. And we have there the laws for purification. Um, and this gets into a very interesting concept, which is Yah tells Aaron, Moses and Aaron, you know, I want the people to bring me a red heifer without defect, in which there's no blemish, in which a yoke has never come. And Eleazar, the priest shall take some of his blood with his finger and sprinkle some of his blood 7 times towards the tent of meeting. And then the ashes shall be kept for the congregation of the children of for the water of uncleanness. It is for cleansing of sin. And then the verse 17, and for the unclean being, they shall take some of the ashes of the heifer burnt for cleansing from sin, and running water shall be put on them in a vessel. So, um, if you look at the Enduring Word, a Bible commentary by David Guzik, which I use sometimes, although sometimes he gets very close to uh, becoming Torah observant, gets very close up to the line, but then stops. So I like him. He puts things in very modern terms. I like him a lot. I think differently in some instances, but anyways, um, and if he pointed out that if you look at the red heifer, uh, that it was dramatically different than every other under sacrifice under the law of Moses. It was a sacrifice, but it was very unique in many different types of ways. And this red heifer, and I'll let you read that yourself, um, is very important. You may even hear about it today, um, as you still hear talk about the third temple. Um, and so, because the red heifer is needed to cleanse the temple, as we see here, some of the blood was sprinkled 7 times towards the tent of meeting or the temple. And so the questions I have here is a third temple needed? Uh, and we see the third temple being referenced in Ezekiel 40 verses 48, or could it be just the altar that's needed? Because in Ezra 3 verses chapters 2 and 3, we see that only the altar was needed even before the while the temple was being rebuilt, that they started putting things into place with just the altar. Now, there's many opinions that vary, um, because Ezra was rebuilding on a foundation known to be where the temple was. So a lot of people were like, well, we don't know where the temple is. A lot of arguments there. I think it may be, I don't think it's where the Dome of the Rock is. I think there's arguments that say, that people might know where it's at. Um, so a lot of gray, a lot of opinions, a lot of, s- stuff going on if you want to go down that path. Now, another question that people may ask is the third temple spiritual or physical? It's a valid question. Um, and so I give here some reasons as to why people think the third temple is spiritual. Many verses that speak to this, but also the reasons why it could be very well be physical. I believe there will be a physical temple on the earth. But just like, was told Moses, um, you will build uh, a temple according to the pattern that you saw in heaven. So there's uh, a temple that is also in heaven, and that was in. You don't have to include that. Um, Exodus 25, verse 40. So we shall proceed. Numbers 20, the death of Miriam, the waters of Meribah. And Numbers 20, and there was no water for the congregation. They assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. I pray sometimes to the Father, and there's that verse that says, remember that we're just dust. Sometimes we're not the brightest as an overall generation, as an overall, sorry, uh, class of being. And so Moses again and Aaron fell on their faces, and the glory of Yah appeared to them. And he's like, look, take your staff and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water up out of the rock for them and give drink to them. And Moses, you know, he's like, look here, you rebels, which by this time, I would have probably lost my cool a long time ago. And so it's kind of interesting that earlier when we were talking, it was Moses and Aaron trying to talk Yah off the ledge, or was that a test? But this time, Moses is the one getting angry. And he strikes the rock. He doesn't speak to the rock. And um, we see him do that here. He strikes the rock and he gets punished for that, him and Aaron. Moses is like, hey, I'm sorry. Yahweh's like, because you did not listen to me, you did not glorify me, you did not do what I told you to do, you will not make it into the promised land, which, you've been searching for, on the hunt for 40 years. Again, David Guzik's commentary has good insight there. Now, there are some thoughts here. Um, Obviously, yeah, God doesn't stay mad with Moses forever. We see him at the Mount of Transfiguration with Elijah, with Yeshua. And so, but in that moment, yes, Moses, who mostly did everything that Yah told him to do, matter of fact, um, it was only recorded that twice, only two times did um, he not do something. This is one of them. I think I got that in these Bible verses here below. And so, but one person don't know who it was, I forgot who it was, said that the one reason that Moses, also another reason that Moses couldn't go into the promised land, because Moses represented the Torah. And the Torah, as good as it is, uh, but also the enemy uses it against us. And so um, it was given because of transgression. And it's not really how Yah, God, wanted to operate. Does he want us to follow his commands? Were commands given in the Garden of Eden? Yes. But it got to a point to where, people were just basically being evil, that he had to give the Torah, and eventually it got codified. So Moses was not um, going to bring it into the land. It was not part of the bigger plan. So the questions here is, what does this say about Moses? And was it Numbers 12:13? Numbers 12:3 rather. Let's see what we have here. What numbers? Oh, yeah. Moshe was very humble, more than all the men who were on the face of all the earth. Like, again, I'm not sure I could have, um, with all that rebellion and stuff like that. I pray that I can with his help. Um, and it says here, Numbers 16:15, that Moses became very angry. Um, and that was during Korah's rebellion, with the people. He was like, look, don't even receive their offerings, their sacrifices. And in Numbers 20, um, verses 10 through 11, well, again, where Moses strikes the rock. And so, wow, like Moses, I'm glad that Yah chose him, knew what he was doing. But what does this also say about Yah, God? Um, that he wants to deal with us in mercy and stuff like that, in a loving type of way. Um, but he also says, I shall show favor upon whom I show favor. I'll have compassion on whom I have compassion. But he will deal with this how he wants it. Sometimes we look at, people that we might think that are like, hey, they deserve the wrath, and he gives mercy. And we're like, hold on, like that's not fair. We think about uh, the parable where Jesus is like, hey, I had these people and I will pay them, and they came in, they worked half a day, and then some of them come later on the day, but I gave them all the same, all the workers the same. And he's kind of like, who are you to tell me how I will deal with my own people? Well, it was Matthew 20, verses 8 through 15. And so we have to understand that there's a lot of things that we do not know about. We look at things very superficially, and we think we know something. And so, yeah, labor is in the vineyard. And so, just something to think about. In Numbers 20, we see that they're going along, going to the promised land. Edom refuses passage. And Yah curses Edom for this, as is stated in Ezra 1 18 and in Malachi 2, verse 5. I want to focus more on Ezra. Because Edom, if you recall, um, was actually come from Esau. We think of Jacob and Esau. And so, Jacob was a conniver, tried to steal from Esau. Esau was the hunter. And Esau descended from Edom. And even though Esau himself uh, turned and reconciled with Jacob, uh, later on in that story, his progeny, his generations past, the Edomites, yeah, uh, didn't do so good. Ezra 118. Huh, maybe it is Malachi. That one to look at. Malachi, one, no. Okay, maybe I have to fix that too. Um, Ezra, huh? I know I have it somewhere. Okay. Um, Basically, it's stated that Edom um, basically did not take care of his blood, his of Israel, and there's this set of passages, verses that say, "Hey, you did not do this. Like these are your people. You were prideful, and therefore Yah is going to curse you." I'll fix that in the PDF also as well. Hold on to see if I can find it right now. Ezra chapter 9. All right, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but all right, I know I looked at that at length. Okay, anyways, um, so then we go into the death of Aaron. And so Aaron gathered to all his people. It says, and then again, verse 26, that he'll be gathered to all his people and he'll die there. And so, again, as I was talking about earlier, that, in the afterlife, was I talking about that? Yeah. So we were talking about that in verse 5, or slide 5, rather. Um, okay. So again, being a deliverance minister, I work with those in different spiritual entities and lingering human spirits and witches and warlocks and all this stuff. And so a question I have here is, what's the difference between Abraham's bosom versus the cloud of witnesses? Maybe not phrased the best way in that question, but let me put it this way. In the Tanakh, the Old Testament, when you died, you were basically sent to Abraham's bosom. It's believed that there was different areas in Abraham's bosom. If you look at Luke 17, um, you have the parable of the rich man. So much stuff I could put in this notes. It's hard for me to get it all. Actually, sorry, Luke 16, 19 through 31, rather. Oh, I have it right there. We see a story there where man passes away. There's a chasm between these two sections where this guy's suffering in one side, but he can't cross to go over to the evil side. So it's basically it's believed that in Sheol, uh, where the dead people go, that's kind of where Abraham's bosoms was, uh, uh, but it was kind of sectioned off. However, after Yeshua died on the cross, and again, veil gets torn, a lot of things changed. And so we see here in 1 Corinthians 15:4 that it says that, when Yeshua was buried, he was raised the third day, then appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom were still alive, some as though they were fallen asleep. So, in other words, ghosts, even though the Bible doesn't use that term. Those that were trapped in Abraham's bosom then got to go up to heaven. And so, because it was Yeshua who was the first fruits, until that time, they were not allowed until Yeshua opened up the heavens for them. And in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 14, if Christ had not been raised, then our preaching is vain and your faith is in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God because we testified about God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise, if it is true that the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, and not even Christ has been raised, and if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile and you are still in your sins. So this is kind of important to know, because a lot of people, we believe that's a big part of our faith, that Christ died that we may have everlasting life. And there's some more specifics in that the Bible points to, but we sometimes gloss over, and we don't, we have to understand that, again, when we die, some of us might go to heaven immediately, some of us might go to hell immediately, awaiting judgment, and some of us, people's spirits may still hang around. And I'm talking even separately than soul fragments. That's something else. That's for people that are still living. So yeah, those in heaven are referred to as the cloud of witnesses, those that were people, but now have jobs to do in heaven. Numbers 21, Arad destroyed the bronze serpent. And again, kind of like the red heifer, this is one of those things that just, you're like, yes, Father, however you want to do this. I don't need to understand. I just need to agree. And so Yah sent curses against the people, and they started getting attacked by snakes. And the people were like, hey, again, because they were grumbling against God, like, you're trying to kill us. And the people then later finally come to their senses. They're like, hey, you know what? You're right. We have sinned. We agree with you. We've sinned. Pray that he takes the serpents away. Moses prays. Yah's like, okay, make a fiery serpent, set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten, when he sees it, shall live. And Moses made a bronze serpent on it and set it on a pole. And if a serpent bit anyone, he would look at the bronze serpent and live. I'm sure there's a lot more insight there that I don't have. But again, people being people, I'm glad that Father Yah instituted that. Don't necessarily know all the reasons why. That's okay. But this led up to the people starting to worship the bronze serpent. And in 2 Kings 18:4, that bronze serpent had to get destroyed because the people were starting to worship it. And so I feel like we as people are just created to worship something, to put something before the Father, whether it's a God, whether we know it's a false God, a deity or not, a demon or not. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Sometimes, it could be money, it could be pride, it could be whatever our lust is. Not understanding it is God. It could be our children, it could be a person, it could be, but a lot of times it is driven by a demon. We just may not know that. Numbers 21 goes into the Song of the Well. King Sihon defeated, the verse there. There's a little bit of foresight before we go into Numbers 22, where it says, because King Sihon was of the Amorites. Yeah, pretty sure it was. Anyways, yeah, of the Amorites. And so, but this is kind of looking to the next chapter as we read it in time. says, "Woe to you, Moab! You are undone, O people of Chemosh," as that was their deity, their god, a god of war. Then it talks about King Og being defeated. King Og was a giant. I'm not going to go into that right now. Numbers 22. Balak, the king, summons Balaam, this you know, prophet type of guy. And this is a very interesting, there's a lot going on. There's just too many notes for me to go into. We could spend a lot of time here. Uh, anyways, but the basically the questions I have here is what is different about this battle versus the previous battles is because the strategies change. In the previous battles up to this point in time, it was mostly, hand-to-hand combat. Um, sure, were there, some gods and stuff like that? I'm sure they were doing, a lot of their sacrifices and stuff like that. But the emphasis, at least in the Bible here, shows that there was a shift to where it was going to primarily be of a spiritual battle. And so Balak was like, I want to hire you, Balaam, to curse these people, and and I will pay you handsomely. And so the interesting thing is, this is a very, again, interesting story. And so they go to him with the fees for divination. Divination, again, looking to the future, going to these false gods, looking to the future, like, hey, what do we do? Blah, blah, blah. But Elohim, Yah himself, comes to Balaam, and it's like, who are these men with you? And Balaam, has some knowledge of who Yah is. He might have thought in that time that, hey, like there's this God and Kamash and he's over this territory, and maybe I just think Yah's like maybe over this territory, and maybe he had that type of understanding. And you know, Yah tells him specifically, do not go with them. Do not curse the people, for they are blessed. However, uh, Balaam says to the people, even if you were to give me all your money, I couldn't do this, but just stay here that I may know what more, the Lord has to say to me. So we can see right here in his mind that he's, it's like, that's a lot of money. And, let me just kind of, you know, basically he wasn't being obedient. And it's very interesting that Yah here comes to Balaam at night and says to him, well, if the men have come to call you, rise, go with them, but only do what I tell you. So Yah starts playing the game also as well. He knows very well that Balaam is being disobedient, but he's going to play this to advantage still. Um, and then this ends up going to the story where uh, of the talking donkey. And we can see here again, Numbers 22, that the displeasure of Yah God burned because Balaam went with those people. Um, it We'll get more into this in the next Parsha study. But yeah, crazy story. And so this is kind of Balaam's story. And so some of the things we have to ask here is, do ungodly people have spiritual gifts? And if we look at some verses, and I'll say yes, um, I believe so. But that is not necessarily a black and white answer. There's still, like goes deeper. Uh, in Romans 11:29 says, for the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. So they can't be taken back. So in other words, that could be understood a few different ways. One, God gave them their gifts at birth and he wasn't taking them back, even if they did do witchcraft and stuff like that. or maybe when they got saved, that God blessed them then, um, and then they turned back to witchcraft, denying God, and kept the gifts. I think it's more the first. You're kind of born with them, um, but you can also develop them also as well. And so, just my thoughts on that. And then also, Second Thessalonians chapter 2 says, guess what? Satan and the demons can also do false signs and wonders also as well. And so that happens a lot. So again, not just a cut and dry answer. And so, can God use animals, objects to do the supernatural? Yes. This is his world. He can use whatever he wants to speak to you. And so it's just, do you have the faith to receive it? And so also know that you have to test everything. So Judges 11, Jepthah delivers Israel, and Jepthah, son of a whore, gets cast out by Israel. But then when they start losing the battle, they find out that he's like this warrior type of guy, and they're like, "Hey, remember us? We'll take you back, and just if you fight for us, we'll make you king." And so Jephthah's like, "Okay, fine, I'll take you, fine, I'll uh, win this battle for you." And so let's try this. There we go. All right. And so what ends up happening is Jephthah makes a vow to Yah, and God says, if you give the Ammonites into my hand, and whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites, shall be Yah's, shall be God's. And I will offer it up for a burnt offering. But I'll tell you um, that there's a lot of reason to believe. I've taught this, I've heard this um, explained from the pulpit, and I don't think a lot of people knew. I don't blame those people; they just didn't know um, that that's actually a mistranslation. There's quite a few mistranslations in the Bible, sometimes even in Strong's Concordance and stuff like that. Anyways, but mostly reliable. And so, because if you look at the great scholar E.W. Bullinger, he basically explains, um, hey, like here's the grammar rules. And if you look at all these different verses, there's a lot of times that Hebrew word um, can be actually to mean or. And even Adam Clark, who agreed and said, it's better to translate this verse, I will consecrate to the Lord, whatever it is that comes through uh, the doors, after I win the battle, or I will offer it up for a burnt offering. Because obviously, if Jephthah is fighting for Israel and for Yah, he knows the commandments, he knows the Torah. So it would not, a lot of people are like, he had to sacrifice his daughter. It's like what? That doesn't make any sense at all, you know? And so um, it's actually believed that he gave up his daughter for service. And so when it says here that it came to be at the end of the 2 months that his daughter, she went out to go live her life for 2 months, let me alone for 2 months and let me go and wander in the mountains and bewail my maidenhood. That when she returned, he did as he had vowed, which is consecrate her to Yah. And she knew no man, and it became a statute in Israel, and the daughters of Israel went every year to lament the daughter of Jephtha, not because she was sacrificed, which is what they're fighting against coming into the land of Canaan. So, a little bit of insight there. Okay. Um, the apostolic writings, John 3, verse 19. And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his work should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in Yah, in God. So the question is, does Yeshua, Jesus, does he judge us? Or is it really that we judge ourselves? In 1 Corinthians 11, it basically says that, we need to examine ourselves so that we don't get judged. But that when we are judged, that he disciplines us, so that we may not be condemned, that we'll learn our lessons now, and not fall into, you know, um, into just constant murmurings, like we're seeing earlier in these Parsha studies that the Hebrew people, it's not just them, it's us too. We get caught in the cycle, just constantly blaming him, but he really wants us to learn and learn his ways. It even says in the Bible that Yeshua uh, um, learned obedience through suffering. Um, and that's in Hebrews 5:8. Now, and then we have to remember in John 5:44 that even Yeshua says, hey, do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There's one who accuses you, that's Moses, in whom you have set your hope. Now, it could be that here that he was talking to a Jewish people, and they were putting all their hopes on, again, the Pharisees and the oral law and all this type of stuff. Um, but um, even that could be some interplay there. But even again, I believe the Gentiles are meant to keep the Torah also as well. Maybe they don't do it as strictly at this point in time as, say, the Orthodox Jewish people, but still, where Yeshua is our example. Even if you don't, even if you just know, if you're just a Christian, to do the Ten Commandments, and so you just may not know that the rest of the Torah explains the Ten Commandments. Um, So we judge ourselves by not following his words. Again, I have that video, that apocalypticism and all that stuff, which you can check out if you want. But here's some more verses on judging to be aware of. Because the Bible says, do not judge lest you be judged. We've talked about before. This is not necessarily discernment. Discernment, we are called to be fruit inspectors to, yes, know who is um, uh, good or bad amongst us, because you don't want to hang around the bad people because they'll pull you down. So, in terms of that type of judging, discerning, yes, we need to be doing. But in terms of salvation, no. Because whatever judgment that we judge, we shall also be judged, and whatever measure we use will be used against us. Why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but do not notice the plank in your own eye? So when I go into a court session, I have to do it with the heart of the Father. I want the people that were doing bad, for even them, I pray for them to also come to an understanding of the light also as well, if at all possible. I'm trying not to, I know there's a lot of things that I do not know what caused a person to do things. I don't know their history. I don't know their generational past. I don't know. And so I have to be careful of the input I get from people, even sometimes in uh, situations, even in marriage situations. Like, I understand everyone's going to give me their side of the story and tell me what they want me to hear, which may not necessarily be the truth. In 1 Corinthians 6:1, as I was just kind of speaking to, should any of you holding a matter against your brother go to be judged before the unrighteous and not before the set apart ones? Do you not know that the set apart one shall judge the world? And if the world is judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Do you not know that we shall judge messengers? I believe that's more means demons. I don't believe angels can really do wrong. They might be able to do better, not necessarily evil. And so I think we, again, judge demons, just my thoughts. How much more then are you to judge the matters of this life? If you then truly have judgments of this life, do you point them as judges who are least esteemed by the assembly? We have a lot of people in our government system that do not believe in the Bible. Some of them actually want to bring Sharia law in to America. So I say this to your shame. Is it so that there's not a wise one among you, not even one who shall be able to judge between his brothers, but brother against brother goes to be judged, and that before unbelievers? So I was saying before, we're called to be kings and priests, yes, and it's easy to say. But we're called really to go into the courts of heaven. We are being trained up because guess what? We'll be judging demons and who knows what else. So all these things that happen in the earth, there's a lot of spiritual stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And we have to learn how to go into the courts of heaven. Not that the courts of heaven solves every problem. I don't believe that, but I think it's also very good to know um, that because we're allowing these things to happen. But this knowledge is coming out, has been coming out for past decade, however long, plus. And obviously knew about it back then, but we've lost a lot of knowledge since the time of the Bible was written. And so we have to learn how to engage on a spirit level because that's what's driving the physical, the earthly stuff that's going on. And, does that mean you don't take it to an earthly court? No, you still might do. You still might need to, but you need to deal with it in a spiritual court also first. Okay, last slide. So is Yeshua, Jesus, the judge of the world? And so this was, one of the questions I had there. And so I got a few verses here that speak to that. And so the answer is yes. And so the great white throne judgment doesn't really happen until, you know, uh, Revelations 21 thereabouts. And so, and until then, there's still a lot of little judgments going on. Um, that will be the ultimate judgment, where I believe that we'll get locked into our uh, belief, whether you do not believe in God, do not want Him, maybe you're mad at Him, for allowing things to happen, you don't want to take any responsibility, and you get sent to hell, or you apply the blood of Jesus and His mercy to your case and ask for forgiveness and repent and release and all that type of stuff. At that point in time, there is no changing sides. Satan can't become an angel at this point in time. They're locked in. And at some point in time, we will get locked in also as well. So with that, actually, just because I need to do this, hold on. All right. So, yes, we've come to the end. And yeah, there's quite a bit to talk about. Honestly, I went on for over an hour and a half. Oof, this is one of my longer ones. And so, again, don't know if you have any questions, comments. Um, don't see anything going on in the chat. Any prayers needed. When we do finish the Parsha, I do believe, that'll be in the fall, that these live streams will probably get much shorter. And I'm hoping that more people will attend. Um, Again, we can get into more prayer, that type of stuff, Q&A, hit some Bible topics, maybe go over some, books of the Bible, maybe, I don't know what. But I just want to let you know that Yeah, there's the color of um, my color chart there, in case you want to know what that was. So, all right. So I hope that this helped you some. I hope that this um, brings you some understanding of how all this kind of, fits together. The Torah, the supernatural aspect. Some people think that that was, you know, done away with. Um, no, it's still intact, as well as, all the rest of it, all the spirituality and all that stuff. It's all the same Bible, and so I'm just trying to bring it all together for you. So I pray that this helps. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to um, put it in the chat. I suggest that you connect with Walk with Yah. Got a lot of videos that kind of explain how this stuff works. And I'm just here to hopefully help you get your blessings. So this is Noe with Walk with Yah. In the name of Yeshua, I bless you.